There we go. And we are live. Hello, all the humans. Welcome to the Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix Sunday Speaker event. Please hit the like button and subscribe to get more of our awesome content, or better yet, become a member of HSGP and volunteer for something that fills you with joy. Today's presentation aligns with the values of humanism by critical thinking. Exercising our minds to build these skills enables us to challenge biases in ourselves and in others, paving the way for a fair, open-minded, and autonomous perspective that fosters a multicultural worldview. Ethical development. Ethical development is a never-ending process that requires constant reflection and evaluation of our personal choices and the consequences they have on others. We should continually adapt and build our moral frameworks with the goal of becoming ever better human beings. And finally, peace and social justice. True peace involves an intense commitment to social justice and affirms the human rights and personal autonomy of all people. We attain peace only by constantly responding to injustice through thoughtful conflict resolution that aims to repair harms and ensure a fair and equitable society moving forward. Today, we have Dr. Lisa Woody with Unearned Privilege. How do we define it, and what types of unearned privilege exist? Dr. Lisa Woody is a licensed clinical psychologist and health psychologist who earned her doctorate from UCLA in 2002. She spent 5 years as a tenure-track faculty member of the psychology department at the University of Northern Colorado, and she then resigned to adjunct status due to chronic migraines. She currently teaches at least one class per semester at UNC, while also operating a business in which she conducts neuropsychological evaluations for clients with a wide variety of medical and psychological disabilities. Dr. Woody has been married to another Dr. Woody since 2006. They have two sons who are 13 and 9. She is an organic gardener, former master gardener, and former yoga instructor. Most importantly, Dr. Woody essentially emerged from the womb in 1974 with a distinct interest in social justice. Her journey towards social justice was shaped early on by having an ardent feminist for a mother, as well as a gay father and stepfather. Although she has been teaching concretely about privilege for well over a decade, recent events have pushed her to become more involved and to try to be even more of a leader in the field. One direct consequence of her activism is the development of a 3.5-hour lecture on the history of race in the United States that she is committed to presenting in every single class she teaches. Please give a big HSGP welcome to Dr. Lisa Woody. Dr. Woody.
My husband's here clapping too. By the way, my husband, it sounds like you may be hearing him speak here next month or later this summer. So you're going to get the whole fan family and, good times for us all. Thank you for having me today. I love hearing the Humanist, the 10 commitments. I'm just listening to it and thinking, damn straight, man, that sounds beautiful. Let's just go out in the streets and start singing those things together. I appreciate you bringing me in today. I have heard a little bit about the kind of programming y'all have been doing in this last year, all the intensity, obviously, with COVID and Black Lives Matter protests on top of the Me Too movement and everything we went through with our last administration, goodness knows. I know for me, it just feels like we keep upping the ante. I got to get out there. I got to get over any fears I have about having conflictual interactions. I've got to suck it up essentially and get my voice out there and start tackling these issues. And I've been doing this my whole life. This is an ongoing journey, I suppose, as most of you know too, right? It never stops. I always tell my students, you learned a lot in school, but I'll tell you what, I've learned a hell of a lot more since I finished my PhD than I ever learned in all those years of schooling. So this never, ever stops. And while I've given this talk 5 times in the last 4 months, it is never the same because I just read the newspaper this morning. So guess what? I got more things to talk about, man. So this is constantly changing, constantly evolving. Now, you've done, my understanding is a lot of focusing on race and race privilege, white privilege in particular, I think in the past year. I mentioned briefly gender privilege. We've talked a little bit about privilege related to sexuality. We tend to come at these topics as if they're in a fragmented fashion, talking about them as separate, discrete topics. What I want to do today is take a step back from focusing so much on one particular type of privilege, step back and point out that, you know what? Our society is set up, in fact, to reward or make privileged a number of different identities. And how about we look at the full scope of those and then start delving into the specific individual identities and their histories. In my experience, it's very helpful, and I'm saying this because I know y'all are going to go out and have conversations with people about this. It is helpful to start with this kind of an organization first, before we go jumping right into white privilege or right into male privilege. I think you're more likely to get a little buy-in from the people that you're talking to if we review all these types of privilege, because chances are the person you're talking to is going to be able to relate to one of these. They may lack privilege in one of these areas. And once you can get that foot in the door and be like, yeah, see, privilege exists there. Yep, you see how it played out in your life. Okay. And guess what? It's not just with that identity. There are other areas of privilege as well. So the way I'm organizing this and talking about this today, it's how I teach it in my classes, and it's constantly been revised based on whatever pushback or comments I got from class, constantly being revised, let me just tell you. But I'm also providing this as a bit of a tutorial, perhaps, in terms of how to go out and try to talk to other people about these issues, because it's not easy. And you really can't do it in a sound bite, right? We need some foundational understanding of these particular issues. So as you're listening today and engaging, thinking about your questions, of course, we're thinking about this on a personal level. We're assessing ourselves, we're assessing our own biases. And yes, we all have them, even the best among us, right? We all have them. So we need to just start to acknowledge those now. It doesn't make us failures, it makes us human, okay? All hail being human. So think about this on a personal level, continue to grow in that way, but also be thinking about how can I take this presentation and use it to further my own conversations in the community, maybe through this organization, maybe through other organizations that you're a part of as well. Now, when I talk about privilege, it comes up in every single aspect of my life. Okay, yes, it's a huge part of teaching, no question. It comes up with my work with my clients too. Big time. And I incorporate this kind of information into my clinical reports, all part of trying to educate anybody who gets their hands on that report all the time. I volunteer in my son's schools, usually one full day a week until COVID hit, in a lower income school. And I am, let me just tell you, pressing these issues left and right. The holiday letter I send out every year, or New Year letter I send out every year. I'm never sure what to call it because I got a wide audience. I totally talk about privilege there too and send these book lists. It's in every single aspect of my life. Live and breathe it, and it's a beautiful thing. I do want to give a shout out. My mom, Chris Comer, she's got herself blocked out right now. She's a member of your organization. She's the reason y'all got in touch with me, and we've had some health issues. She's here in Colorado. She's 10 feet away from me, sitting in the kitchen, but not looking at me because I still get nervous talking in front of people. So everybody's banned to the other room. In my classes in particular, I absolutely cover these topics in depth within the first 3 weeks of every single class that I teach. And these are largely undergraduate psychology courses. Occasionally it's a graduate course as well. In psychology courses in particular, we are constantly talking about group differences in health, group differences in mental health, group differences in access to resources and such. They're always there, but very rarely in any college course, except for maybe a history course, are we talking to students about why? Why do these group differences exist? Most of the time we're going with this false assumption that, oh, well, they learned about it in school. Sorry, let me stop the laughter. If any of you've read an American history textbook, you know what a load of garbage that is. None of them are learning this in school. And so if we don't address these topics in these courses, we're allowing them to arrive at their own conclusions about why these group differences exist. And most of those conclusions they're arriving at are just flat out wrong. So in the last year in particular, but really for about the last 10, I've said, I think it's unethical for me as a psychologist. I think it violates the ethics of my field to talk about these group differences and not actually give the historical bases for why they exist at this time. Ergo, everyone in my classes gets this talk. And as of the last year, I am also doing a 3.5-hour lecture on the history of race in the United States. And it has been an eye-opener for me, for them. That's another thing I keep revising every other day. And I anticipate to do so for the next, I don't know how long I'm going to live, but let's be optimistic and say 4 to 5 decades. All right. So let's preface this whole discussion with some information about what privilege is not. Because I know if you're like me, you've probably had talks with folks before, right? Trying to explain to them, hey, you have cisgender privilege, you have white privilege, you have male privilege. And I'm just going to guess here. Typically, we get responses like, how dare you tell me I'm privileged? Do you not know that I have worked my fingers to the bone? I worked 2 to 3 jobs to put myself through school. How dare you? How dare you call me privileged? I'll occasionally have students share that in class, or I did in the past. I've learned how to present it differently now. And sometimes it'll come up in exam questions where that anger and that defensiveness will really come forth. What I've come to understand is when people respond that way, they do not understand the definition of privilege. There is a fundamental misunderstanding going on here, okay? Now, I have a very more recent pop culture example. If any of you ever saw the movies High School Musical and a character named Sharpay, we were trying to think of older examples. And I'm thinking like the show Dynasty from the 1980s. Think really rich white people who've been handed every single thing their whole lives on a silver platter, never had to work for a thing, just ring the bell and ask for their servants. I think that the average person out there right now thinks when we say they're privileged, that we're accusing them of being that, of being someone who's never had to lift a finger, never had to suffer, never had to work for a thing. Well, I'll tell you, if somebody was accusing me of that, I'd be defensive too, right? Like, come on, man, you give me some credit for the hard work I've done. But the thing is, again, that is a fundamental misunderstanding of what privilege means. And so I always start with my students and I say, listen, this is not a philosophy class, but to be human is to suffer. We got to just accept this right now. To be human is to suffer. There is no person who's going to go through this life without suffering, who's never going to hurt, be in pain, be fearful, have troubles. That does not exist. We all have to work hard, and we do get credit for the hard work that we're engaged in, okay? But some of us face more obstacles than others, depending upon the identities that we just happen to be born with. We just happen to be born with. It's not anything that we actually did ourselves to earn it. Some people are born with identities for which they lose their rights. They lose many basic rights. And I want to point out that whenever we see discrimination, there's a flip side. Whenever discrimination occurs, somebody's on the other side of that benefiting from that discrimination. You don't get discrimination and prejudice without privilege at the same time. And every one of us here has some type of privilege. Some of us have a whole buttloads of it, okay? Some of us have a little bit of it. And so everyone here is going to come in with a little bit of different experiences, and that is exciting. So as we are talking about this today, pay attention to your reactions. Don't get down on yourself. If you start feeling defensive, just pay attention to that. Observe it. See what you can learn about yourself a little bit more through your defensiveness. I've been defensive in the past at times too. It takes work. It's uncomfortable. Is it ever uncomfortable sometimes? But if we can start to figure this out in ourselves a little bit better, a lot easier to go have these conversations with other people as well, right? If we can show some humility and be like, hey man, I've been in this boat too. It really is okay. So as I talk about these identities today, I do want to give credit where credit is due, okay? In 2014, I attended a fantastic retreat at UNC, and that's University of Northern Colorado, okay, not North Carolina. And it was called Catalyst. I have heard about it being in other locations, so you might look it up. but was essentially a social justice retreat entirely for UNC students, faculty, and staff. And it was a weekend-long retreat. I got to go as one of the facilitators, and they provided us with the organization that I'm going to teach to you all today, really looking at unearned privilege in terms of these 8 separate identities. In addition, that 18-page document, some of you are going, holy crap, we didn't see it, we didn't read it. Catalyst is where I got the article that I sent to you, and it's also where I got the privilege chain that I've sent to you. Don't stress at all. It's probably better if you hear my talk first and then go read it, okay? No big deal whatsoever, but take a look at it later. So typically, you've got that statement of privileges. It is not exhaustive. There are so many other statements that we could give for this privilege chain. In my class, I have students do the whole thing anonymously, so they're not telling other people, okay, what they're saying yes to or not saying yes to. We don't have time to go through all of these things today. But say things like, you have some privilege if your place of work or school is closed on your major religious holidays. That's privilege, okay? If you have some college education, if you don't have to worry where the curb cuts are located, or you don't even know what a curb cut is, okay, that's a sign of privilege. If you can buy greeting cards that reflect people and relationships like you, that's a sign of privilege. If you can go to a local hair salon, be reasonably assured someone there is going to know how to cut your hair. Okay, if we are predominantly white folks, we've not had this experience before, but let me tell you, there's a whole lot of people out there that cannot walk in to your average hair salon. If you've never had to approach your professor to ask for test accommodations, to self-disclose that you've got a disability, okay, you've got a privileged identity. If you got the daily newspaper delivered to your house growing up, which I did, okay, that is a sign of privilege as well. So there's many, many different types of privilege. You will see comments in that chain about age privilege too. That's not what I'm going to talk about today, because I'm so focused on unearned privilege, and age privilege is something that every one of us hopefully will get to experience in the course of our lifetimes. So it won't be limited to just one particular group. I'm always want to encourage people, if you think of more statements that you think I should add to that list, please send them in this chat chain here, or go ahead and email them to me, because I'm always wanting to expand this particular list. So I start with that, and that gets people like, oh, okay, privilege, a little bit different than I thought. A lot of times my students who don't have a lot of privilege are heartened by that exercise, because they realize, well, I got a little more privilege than I thought. So it can even have some therapeutic value in that regard. Then I move on to the actual article that y'all got. Okay, it's by Johnson. And the definition, the technical definition of privilege, it exists when one group has something of value that is denied to others simply because of the group they belong to, not because of anything they've done or failed to do. My husband and I stole this title for a previous talk, and I don't know who to credit it to, unfortunately, but it's just because you were born on third base, it doesn't mean you hit a triple, okay? You got lucky. You got born on third in a society that happens to value your identities. That's what we're talking about. Unearned privilege, it gives the dominant groups a competitive edge all over our society. And if we're part of that dominant group, we're often kind of reluctant. What a soft, stupid way to say that. We are incredibly reluctant. Holy shit, we are reluctant to acknowledge that privilege. Okay. And in fact, a lot of us are blinded to the fact that we've even got it. I find unless you hang out with people who have different identities than you and I, a lot of times we're not even going to be aware that we have privilege in these areas. We're insulated. And that's by design. Okay. That's not an accident. That is by design. So then, talking about that, I've introduced this broad topic of unearned privilege. Then I want to move into 8 different types of unearned privilege. Some of these, of course, were covered in the article that you read. But before we move into these, I'm going to throw out a term that I'm sure you've heard in this last year. I hope you heard it a long time before, called intersectionality. I see just a hand wave and show me you've heard intersectionality. Fantastic. We want to thank Kimberly Crenshaw, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, of course, for that term. We're not just one identity, are we? Any of us. We're a mix. We're a complex mix of all kinds of identities, individual traits, and these social identities. And when you have more than one non-privileged identity, I'm going to say that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts here, okay? Different identities can interact together in very powerful ways. Being a Black woman is not just, okay, adding white privilege, a lack of white privilege to a lack of male privilege, and you get what it's like to be a Black woman. It's worse than that, okay? Those things interact and create even worse outcomes for Black women in particular. So we always want to be looking at all the different identities that are, I'm thinking about clients because I'm a psychologist, but our clients, our friends, our fellow humans, all the different identities that we possess. You might have a white man who looks like he's got every privileged identity in the world, and then you find out he's a gay man. And you're like, oh, okay. All right, so you do know what it's like to not have some privilege. You are having that experience in some areas of your life. So we always want to be looking at how these identities are interacting. All right, let's dive in. Some of you I know really want to know what they are in advance. So real quick, I'm just going to say them. I'm going to do gender. I'm going to do race. I'm going to do sexual identity and gender identity separate. We're going to do religion, SES, nation of origin / first language, and also able-bodied, able-mindedness. Yeah, I rushed through that. Don't worry, we're coming back to it. So let's talk about gender. The privileged identity in our culture is the male gender, okay? When I'm talking about gender in this particular point, I suppose maybe I'm talking more about sex. I'm talking about the genitalia that you were born with and whatever identity essentially that they assigned to you when you were born based upon your genitalia. And if you had a penis, here's the thing, you got some privilege that those of us without didn't have. Now, the privilege that we're talking about today, it doesn't just happen. It wasn't just like an accident of history, okay? Nothing like that. No, man, this was steady abuse of the laws in our country to ensure that male privilege existed and would continue to exist over time. I'm trying to write some notes down to myself this morning. Let me see here. So let's think about the fact, for how long have women been considered the property, or were women considered the property of their husbands, right? Unable to own any land of their own, have their own resources, unable to work in various capacities. Man, yeah, that's sounding a little too much like 2021 in some ways here. Unable to vote, okay? And I guess we had intersectional identities there. White women started voting a long time before women of color did. How about being unable to access childcare or birth control and the laws around those issues? Being unable to even accuse marital partners of rape, much less, successfully bringing charges against them. Being unable to hold anyone at all accountable for rape or sexual harassment. These are all parts of our laws, and these laws were created over time by the folks with privilege, in this case, males, to continue to maintain male privilege. It was not an accident. And once you get the laws in place, popular cultures is happy to jump in and continue to reinforce these messages, okay? We know male privilege still exists in powerful ways to this day. Gonna make more money, perceive more positively. My male colleagues in a college classroom, we could stand up there and do the exact same damn thing, and they are gonna get higher evaluations than I am. And it's, again, that lovely little penis, all right? And it just makes such a big difference in this world. And that was not really intended to say little, sorry about that, but that's just the way it came out. But generally speaking, in our culture, males are treated as the norm to which the rest of us are compared, and usually found coming up short, okay? Being inadequate. So gender, a big one we all need to be thinking about in terms of the gender we were assigned at birth. Then we get race. Oh, I cannot tell you how hard it is for me to try to do this succinctly because I am ready to go off on 4 or 5 hours at least, and just because I get so excited about these topics. All right. I talk more about this than anything because race leads to such tremendous differences in our physical and mental health. Okay. Not because of anything inherent to the human, but because of how we are treated differently in our society based upon race. So I originally in class focused a lot on Black history, and I now cover Indigenous peoples' history, Black history, Latinx history, and Asian American history in that lecture. I'm not an expert on those things. This is all self-taught. I don't know that I sent the book list, Ron, but I can do that. You might be a little overwhelmed. It's about 7 pages long, but it's got a lot of good ones in there. And anybody who wants to ask me afterwards can continue to ask for recommendations. So white privilege, let's talk about white privilege here for just a second. You've learned a lot about this. This is not a surprise. I can live wherever the heck I want to live. I can get loans from banks, especially if I'm a male, but you know, a white woman generally can get one too. I can walk around stores without being followed by people suspicious of my activities. I can drive without being a target for police officers. I can try to hail a taxi and not be entirely passed by again and again and again because of my racial background. I go to store counters, people pay attention to me. I don't get ignored. I can use drugs with far less fear of being arrested. Okay. Now I could even sell drugs with far less fear of being arrested as a white person. I can avoid the constant microaggressions that have a cumulative negative impact on our health. Things like, wow, you're so articulate. Who knew you could be so articulate? As if that was a compliment to pay somebody. I have many more opportunities to accumulate wealth. Okay, and as did all of my previous generations in my family. We'll talk about that. I see myself reflected in the majority of leaders that are out there in this country. I can get my hair cut and styled pretty much anywhere. Don't even have to ask at the door. Can you cut white hair? They just do. I'll be charged less typically for rent, less for cars. If I want to sell my house, it's going to get appraised most likely at a higher value than it would the house of a being sold by a person of color. And the list goes on and on and on. Now, I've studied race history independently by different racial groups, but I can tell you that putting together an entire lecture on this, I'm so utterly disgusted. I am so utterly disgusted that I'm 47 years old and it took me on my own putting this together. What the hell is that about, right? What is that absolutely about? When you put it all together, it is very, very clear from the very beginning that white America has consistently, in every way possible, tried to guarantee that we had a lower caste, essentially, using Isabel Wilkerson's term, a lower caste of folks to eventually be our cheap, exploitable labor force, whether through slavery, through convict leasing, through immigration laws that get tweaked to allow in one group that we can exploit, and then they act up and start demanding their rights, damn it. And so we'll change our laws and let's get them out. And okay, now we'll bring in another group that we can exploit. Amazing, amazing to me. Now just looking at Black history alone, again, this doesn't happen by accident, folks. It doesn't happen by accident. I'm reading a book right now. I think it's called 400 Souls by Ibram X. Kendi. Some of you have heard of it. It details the last 400 years in 5-year increments by about 90 different authors in the history for Black America. And you can see again and again and again how humans tried to challenge these racist laws, tried to challenge this forced slavery. And every single time, from locality to town to state to country, we have immediately, white people have immediately fought back and developed laws. Nope, gonna cut off that loophole. Nope, cutting off that loophole too. Nope, gonna cut that loophole as well. No, you will not get your rights. And we've watched for Black Americans go through forced slavery, the supposed end of slavery and the brief period of Reconstruction, which goes right into convict leasing. Well, we'll just arrest you. We're allowed under the 13th Amendment to do slave labor with our prisoners. So, hey, we still got a nice back door in here. And we'll back that up with Jim Crow throughout the South. And we'll back that up with the entire sundown town movement throughout the North and the West. Let's see, we'll subject you to redlining, and we'll make sure you can't get any bank loans whatsoever to ever accumulate any wealth. If you do actually have a successful town, we'll do what we did like in Tulsa, Oklahoma 100 years ago, and we'll just destroy the entire town. We'll chase you out of town. We'll destroy your businesses. We will provide all kinds of job protections with the New Deal, but sorry, agricultural workers who are all predominantly Black and brown, yeah, y'all aren't going to get included because we had to satisfy our white Southerners when we made that particular deal. Okay. And where are we now? We've spent the last 40 to 50 years in a state of mass incarceration, where people of color are disproportionately targeted and arrested for same shit white people are doing, okay? But they're getting disproportionately targeted. Yes, I see someone saying Rosewood. There are many examples of Black towns being just obliterated, quite honestly. And what do we get with mass incarceration? Man, watch the documentary 13th on Netflix by Ava DuVernay, please. It's very, very powerful. But what we've got is twofold. We've got people with a criminal history becoming second-class citizens, a la Jim Crow. You have a lot of restricted rights, of course, once you've been convicted. And hey, we've also got that really convenient, cheap labor source available. The more we can get people in prison, hey, corporations can really make a whole hell of a lot of money off of that labor. And when I look at this full circle that we have come, honestly, I'm like, damn, we have not gotten nearly as far as we thought. There are, what's the data? Doug, you may know this one. So much of our Black community is in prison today. The birth rates, the successful birth rates for Black women today are worse than they were back at the time in the 1850s and 60s. They're worse now. I've got 7 pages of notes on this that I can't go through, but just absolutely they are worse. And we are seeing these health outcomes in every single way. Thank you. I just got the all clear from my husband. So I'll tell you what, everybody, I do have good book recommendations, and I will send both the overall book list, and I'll also send just the specific ones for each of these topics. I'll forward it to Ron, and then Ron can get it out to everybody, okay? Right on. All right. Okay, so let's move into gender identity now. So I said earlier, we see what genitalia we have at birth and we get assigned a particular gender. For many of us, however, though, it's not a fit. It doesn't fit that label that we were given. For me personally, it did fit. Okay, born with a vagina, labeled female. I feel like a female. I always have. Ergo, I am referred to as cisgender. There's consistency between the label I was given and my internal identity. For folks, however, who don't feel that consistency, who feel that their identity, in fact, is different from the one they were assigned at birth, then a common term we might use is transgender, okay? Gender queer, gender fluid, two-spirited. There are about like 170 different really awesome terms out there that people use. Different terms work for different folks. If I am cisgender, I know that my gender is never going to be questioned. Nobody's going to be sitting there trying to figure me out. Generally speaking, strangers are not going to ask about my genitalia. Why people think that's okay to do with someone who's transgender, I will never know. It is utterly inappropriate, of course. I'm not going to have to fight to have my gender recognized on legal documents. I won't be placed with the wrong gender if I'm in the military or in prison or in an immigration detention center, for example. It was one of the exam questions I came up with last year. Let's see. I can use public bathrooms without fear of assault. Rates of bladder infections are actually, unfortunately, high amongst transgender individuals because of the fear of using a freaking public bathroom. I can get healthcare without fear of being ridiculed or denied services because of my gender. We have a very good friend who's now a family member, former student, and we've been going through his transition process now for about 5 or 6 years. And he took our last name, as did his wife, which is really awesome. And we've been going through traveling, doing the aftercare after his surgeries in another state. My mom went out for 2 weeks too. I was so upset to hear, though, that recently, even at this hospital in Oregon, where they do a lot of these procedures, he woke up in, what's it called, Mom? Recovery. Yeah, he woke up in recovery to hear some of the nurses laughing and making fun of him for being trans. All I can say is they're lucky his wife didn't come in and just smack the shit out of him because she should have, And I'm like, this is what he had to worry about. He got in a car accident and he had to worry right then with the emergency services. Am I going to have to face discrimination right here and now, as they try to ascertain maybe what my gender is? And watching him as well, I've learned I won't have to stay in a dead-end job just to keep the health insurance that's going to allow me to go through those surgeries or to continue to take the hormones that I need to take on a regular basis, as this individual that we know is stuck in right now. I don't have to even consider undergoing these transition procedures. And having gone through it with a couple folks now and a new friend who's going through it now as well, if you've never been through it with someone, folks, it is hard. It is arduous. It is painful. It is emotionally challenging, and it takes a long time. For him, it's one surgery a year. We're like 5 years into this process. It's an incredibly long, difficult process. And unfortunately, we see the laws being manipulated. So do you have rights or do you not? Yeah, it kind of depends on who the current administration is. Yeah, do you have a job with the military? I don't know. Let me see who got elected recently. Again, laws are shaping these experiences. Okay, sexuality. I'm watching my time and I'm like, crap, I gotta hurry a little bit. So sexuality. In our culture, heterosexual identities have always been the privileged identity. Okay, any other identity, whether you want to use the term homosexual, bisexual, pansexual, asexual, any other identity is the non-privileged identity in this regard. And again, we can look towards our history of laws. Okay, for how long in this country was homosexuality illegal? Could we still find homosexuality being illegal in the books and arcane books of laws in various municipalities throughout our country? Yeah, I'm betting we probably could. Sorry, peanut gallery over here is like, yes, definitely. Okay. Some countries, you could still receive the death penalty if you're found to be gay. You could be forced out of your residence. You could be forced out of your job, not having any legal recourse whatsoever. You certainly weren't going to be given access to any children or custody over children that you might have had, correct? And sadly, my field of psychology did an even bigger disservice, and we put homosexuality in the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. Okay, we called it a mental disorder until there was enough civil rights movement essentially to make us go, yeah, you're right. That sucked of us. We're wrong. We need to change that now. We are still catching up. I mean, transgender identity was considered a mental disorder for a long time too. Not now. Gender dysphoria is, we'll treat people for gender dysphoria, but being trans, no. It's just another way of being. It is not a mental illness. So if I'm heterosexual, I've always had the privilege of being able to marry and get all the benefits therein. We've gotten to see this. When they integrated schools after Brown versus Board of Education, it makes it sound like, oh, yeah, it just happened. And then you read the books and you find out, no, it did not just happen. People fought this all over the country and they're still fighting it now. Same thing with gay marriage. Okay, we think, oh, it happened. Everybody can do it now. No, you travel around the United States and you're going to see how many places people are still going to have a hell of a time actually getting marriage licenses, okay, from the local folks. I can walk down the street with my partner without risk of violence, ridicule, okay? I can see myself in relationships depicted in books and movies. I'm not at increased risk of depression and suicide as a teenager because of the kinds of bullying that I receive. Okay, that's going to go for transgender identity as well. There's a new documentary, and it's somewhere in my piles of notes here. I think it's on PBS, but it's about LGBTQ history. Anybody hear about that right now? Does anybody know of it? Okay, if I can find the name, I'll send that along too when I send an email to Ron, because I'm really wanting to watch that right now. All right, let's come to religion. Something near and dear to everybody's hearts here. I know this is, if no place else, this is probably where many of you have felt a lack of privilege in your own lifetimes, given your involvement with the Humanist Society. So in our country, Christianity has been privileged from the very beginning. Any other religion, agnosticism, atheism, anything besides Christianity is the non-privileged identity, okay? If I'm a Christian, we know my religious holidays are automatically state, they're federal holidays, right? I get the day off, man. I can just totally celebrate. Whereas my students who are Muslim, who are Jewish, are having to ask for days off, or they're having to miss days where then they have to make up that work in order to be able to observe their particular religious holidays. I should say I was raised secular. My mom defines as atheist, and we did celebrate Christmas in kind of a secular fashion. So I was not entirely, like, I still benefited, I guess, a bit from the Christian privilege in that regard. But where I've seen the Christian privilege play out so much is in the schools. Ugh, in the schools, you know, can prayer be allowed in schools? The Pledge of Allegiance, which I reworded as a kid growing up, and I still reword when I'm volunteering now, you know, dropping the word God, saying, pursuing liberty and justice for all, because goodness knows we've never had it, right? When I am volunteering in the schools in December, dude, it's all Santa Claus all the time in public schools. This is all they talk about. And I have talks with these teachers every single year about, if you're gonna do that, equal time, man, equal representation, or keep it all out, okay? One or the other. But it's like reinventing the wheel every single year, talking with a brand new teacher about this topic. It's incredibly frustrating. I'm going to hear prayers and references to God in all kinds of formal meetings that I may attend, including when our Congress, our National Congress, opens for each session. They open with a prayer in reference to Christian God. Okay. Just watching the inauguration this year. A lot of you may have noticed this too, how much God figured into the inauguration, people having to talk about it, proving your God credentials, right? Your religious credentials for the sake of getting elected. If I'm Christian, I'm not getting bullied for my religious views. Now, I know there's a lot of Christians out there that are very upset that Starbucks won't put Merry Christmas on their freaking coffee cup. I don't really think of that as being tremendously abusive. Okay, I'm thinking they can handle that. I don't really see that as true blue discrimination. Generally speaking, if you're Christian, you've still got all of the privilege in our country. And let me just add to that, that of course it governs a lot of our laws. And I'm thinking specifically, I have a lot of expertise or background in HIV/AIDS. And under George W. Bush, we gave millions of dollars, no, billions, to the treatment of AIDS and prevention of AIDS around the world. But while about a fourth of that budget was allocated towards prevention, our Christian values said, sorry, you can't ever talk about condoms in any of your prevention literature, and you surely cannot talk about gay sex. So sorry, but do enjoy the money. To which a couple of the countries did this. Thanks anyway, but no. And others took it and tried to use it in the ways that they could. But look how much this Christian theology is affecting the way we are treating other countries, the types of help we're willing to give, all the caveats that we put around the type of help we're willing to give. So again, this is very much integrated into our laws today, not just historically, but today. Okay, socioeconomic status, next one. This is another one where many of you may have experienced this lack of privilege in your own life. And this is often one I think it's a good one to start talking to people about, because so many of us can in fact relate. If I'm of upper middle class or upper class, I'm housing and food secure. Okay, I don't spend significant time every single day worrying, how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to feed my kids? Can I only give them 2 meals again today, or am I going to be able to figure out how to find that third meal for them? I'm not going to lose my job if my car breaks down. I'm going to be able to afford to get it fixed. I'm going to be able to afford a rental. I can access healthcare. I have healthcare. Granted, it sucks sometimes, but it's better than nothing, as we're all learning during COVID, especially. Okay, I can take time off of work when I need to for emergencies, family emergencies, to care for my kid or my husband if something goes on. I can afford childcare. I can afford to live in school districts with decent schooling, with better funding. And that sets up my kids, to be quite successful in life as a result. I can live in areas with healthy air quality, with parks, with relative safety, where you're not going to see liquor stores on every other corner, like I used to see in Los Angeles, okay? Or fast food places on every other corner, okay? I can work in jobs where I'm not exposed to toxic substances day in and day out. And then I get to go home and live in an area where I'm still exposed to those same toxic substances and paying higher rent for it, by the way, just to add insult to injury. Let's see. Oh gosh, didn't COVID bring a lot of these things to light? I was able to work at home during a pandemic. I was not a frontline worker. I didn't have to put my life at risk. Okay. We were able to be home working ourselves, and thus we were able to keep our kids home for a portion of time until we made the personal decision that it was okay for them to go back to school. All those things were our rights. We had access to healthcare. We had access to getting vaccines very quickly. Okay, even my 13-year-old's getting a second shot tomorrow. This is part of wealth in a lot of ways. Of course, that's tied to being white too. You can't separate out any of this. I can afford higher education for myself, my family, my kids, and I can build wealth. Okay, higher education in Colorado, it doesn't pay so well. Let me just tell you that now. But I own a house. Okay, I'm accumulating wealth that I can then use for loans to help out my kids and my family. Being able to own a home is a huge thing. And if I can't do that, I am forever stuck in the rental cycle, rental eviction potential cycle. Okay. So again, laws help reinforce this. Look at our tax laws and who gets the breaks in our country with taxes and who doesn't. What are laws regarding evictions in our country? Our whole cash bail system. You got enough money, you're going to get out of jail. You're going to get declared innocent. It is an incredibly unjust system, and it's the green stuff that makes the difference. Okay. We love to say that anybody can pull themselves up by their bootstraps and make it in America. Anybody, you could be a self-made man. That's a lovely theory. It's a lovely myth. It plays really well in Hollywood. Okay. In reality, very few people ever make it out of poverty. Very few. And again, that's by design. That is not their personal failure. Okay, nation of origin and first language as our next one. If you are an American-born citizen who speaks English, you're going to have more privilege than people who are not. And this is absolutely related to race too. Because if I'm a white person speaking a different language in this country, I'm going to be treated differently than a brown person speaking Spanish, for example. Okay, so again, very much related to race. But for me, an American citizen who speaks English, I'm not living in constant fear of my citizenship status. I'm not living in fear, looking over my shoulder at every moment. Is there a cop following me? Is somebody looking at me suspiciously? I'm not living in fear every time someone knocks on my door, wondering if it's ICE coming to get me. No one's going to look at me and tell me to go back home. Get the hell back home to Scotland. What are you doing here, right? Yeah, I don't hear that. All right, I don't hear that. And they're never going to say that to me. No one questions my intellect just because I can't speak fluently in English. Okay, for some reason, people seem to think if you speak a different language and not English, you just automatically lose IQ points. You're like, dude, you only speak one language and they speak three. Who's got the IQ points, buddy? Come on, man. So these things frustrate me a great deal. I can apply for jobs. I can apply for housing, scholarships, social services, healthcare. Never going to have my citizenship questioned. I'm always going to understand the applications, because they're written in English. I'm not at risk of being deported at any point in time and my kids suddenly being left here on their own with no support whatsoever, falling through the cracks. I'm not relegated to the dirtiest and most dangerous jobs available in our country because those are the only folks that will hire me. But they do love to hire me. They love to actively recruit me, in fact. Thank you, corporate America. I'm able to know my rights. Laws written in English. I can read it. I can figure these things out. Part of me doing the lecture on the history of race in the United States was also a history of immigration law in the United States. You can't separate the two out. And what's very clear to me is that we have consistently, to this day, manipulated immigration law to guarantee a source of cheap, exploitable labor that is almost always a person or population of color. And I'll give you a little insight right here. Read the book, The Making of Asian America by Erica Lee, The Making of Asian America. In our country, you'd think immigration law was shaped mostly by our interactions with Central America. Okay, that's what so much of the conversation is. No. Turns out most of American immigration law has really been shaped by responses to different Asian groups coming in at different times or being lured in for exploitable labor. So do please look into these issues. And I want to point out too that identity varies and is tenuous for people who aren't your white Americans, okay? So let's take Asian Americans right now. Horrendous discrimination towards Asian Americans in our history, all the way up through World War II, of course, and the Japanese internment camps. Then the last 50 years or so, sort of a different kind of relationship. Asian Americans, suddenly white America's calling them the model minority. It's really a backhanded compliment meant to discredit other minorities, of course. But for a long time, I think saw a bit more status relative to other minority groups in our country. Now, however, with COVID and with a lot of the language that's been used towards China and about the origins of COVID and our intensifying relationships with China, you are seeing an incredible rise of anti-Asian discrimination going on around our country right now. Seeing this in the papers every day, so I'm going to assume that you all are seeing this too. And that was a big thing that I was really taking from this lecture is when you're not white, you're not an American citizen, or even if you are an American citizen, but you're not white, your citizenship is tenuous. Your value, your full value as a citizen of our country is tenuous. It can change on a dime. You can't really rest easy because it really can change, and it does. And I have many Asian American students who have been talking to me about this at length lately and helped me, turn me on to The Making of Asian America, which is a very, very powerful book. Okay, let me come to my last topic. I am still watching the time, I promise. This last topic is able-bodied, able-mindedness. If you are a person with no disabilities whatsoever, you have a lot of privilege in our culture, okay? The more visible the disability is, the more discrimination we tend to encounter. So technically, I have a visual disability from developing glaucoma 5 years ago, almost going blind. It kind of sucks, right? But to look at me, you don't know, right? The average person out there would not know unless I choose to self-disclose this disability. So I'm not going to face the same level of discrimination as a person who comes in a wheelchair, who maybe has hearing aids in or has a cane that they're walking with and a seeing eye dog, or something very visible to the person from the outside. So Invisible disability is definitely an important topic that we want to consider as well. But if I'm able-bodied, able-minded, I never have to worry about self-disclosing my disability to a boss or a professor, somebody who has power over me, my job, and my grade. I don't know if any of you or many of you have thought about just how hard that is to go up to a person in a position of power and say to them, I have this disability that's potentially stigmatizing illness. And I'm saying this to you, and I have to trust that you're not going to discriminate against me as a result. And sometimes, folks, that trust is misplaced. Okay? A lot of times that trust, unfortunately, is misplaced. But if I'm able-bodied, able-minded, or at least appear to be so, I'm not automatically overlooked for jobs. I'm not automatically looked over for relationships. I'm not viewed as asexual. Okay. I don't encounter, again, the physical obstacles every hour of every day, from a lack of curb cuts to stairwells with no elevators, to door frames not wide enough for me to pass, to restrooms that can't accommodate my physical needs. I'm not going to have people question, oh, you're a little off today. Did you forget your meds? Women in particular, we've gotten that for centuries. Oh, she must be having her period, right? We love that. We just love that. I just can't even tell you how much we love that. Okay. Don't have to worry about occasionally taking time off due to unpredictable symptoms. I write accommodation letters for my clients all the time, and I'm like, people want to know, well, when exactly are they going to need time off? Sorry, but PTSD is unpredictable, folks. Sometimes you don't know. And so we've got to have some accommodations here to allow for people with these identities to still be full contributing members of our society. And a great book on that one, A Disability History of the United States by Kim Nielsen, Disability History of the United States. And not surprisingly, you will find that disability has historically been very tied up with issues of gender and race and immigration status. It all goes together, all goes together. Okay, so where I want to try to bring us now, full circle, is I want to bring it back to my life for a moment and try to put some of this into a context, all right? So I am a white cisgender female who's generally attracted to men. I don't identify with any particular religion. Dad does have a religion. Mom, I said, is atheist, though, as I said, we've celebrated Christmas in the secular fashion, so we still benefit from Christian privilege. I'm the daughter of parents who divorced when I was 3. My mother never remarried. She's been a single parent that entire time. My father is gay. He and his husband are now married, have been together 43 years, and have both been HIV positive since the late 1980s. Hence my interest in those particular topics. My mom's a nurse. My dad was an educator and an administrator before he had a stroke 10 years ago. Both of them got some money from their families initially when they were younger, and they were trying to get married and trying to get their education. They were able to get some help from their families. Now, the families were fairly cash poor. These were farmers in rural Michigan, but they owned their property. They owned the farms, and thus had the resources available to be able to help their children in that particular regard. Okay. I was born in this country and I've spoken English my whole life. My family's vacillated between lower middle class, lots of farmers, lots of blue collar workers, and middle class. We've got some very highly educated, and we've got folks who have their GED coming out of high school, kind of everything in between. My mom and grandmother lived together many years to try to pool their money. Both were single parents. My mom and I moved to Arizona, just us, back in 1984. And of course, as a single parent, what do you do for childcare, right? So from age 10 until I moved out and went to Arizona State, she worked the graveyard shift at the hospital and I stayed alone because that's what you do. And it was fine. It's made me who I am today, right? Exactly. So as I said, I have no visible disabilities, but I do have a visual disability, and I've struggled with some anxiety and depression ever since having children. So if you look at my life, you see a lot of privileged identities. Certainly you see hardship. I didn't grow up with the 2.5 kids and the married parents and the white picket fence, right? I'm grateful for the way I did grow up because I've had so many awesome learning experiences into all these different identities, in fact, that we're talking about today. But even though I had a hardship, here I am at age 28, I had a, full-time professor, 10-year track from the #1 university in the country. I'm owning a house. So how the heck did I get here? Well, this is what you and we all have to grapple with one-on-one. Partly I'm here where I am today because of things that were under my control. I worked my ass off. I'm smart. I'm very disciplined. I had parents emphasize it like crazy, under threat from my mom. Oh, you will be able to support yourself, and you know this. Hell no, you'll be a cheerleader. You're going to get out there and play the sport. Mom, I'm giving you the full heads up here, okay? So yeah, I can claim some of that. I can claim ownership over that. But a lot of the things that got me here today were things that were entirely out of my control, that have absolutely nothing to do with anything that I have personally accomplished. So because of our whiteness, generations of my family have been able to live pretty much wherever they wanted to. And they largely gravitated towards white neighborhoods with good school systems, because those two things tend to go hand in hand. We were never subjected to bigotry in real estate or redlining. Generations of my family have been able to take out loans successfully for things like buying a home, buying a car, paying for an education, starting a business. They were allowed to accumulate wealth. And thus, when I wanted to buy a house as a single woman, my mom, who's been a single woman, was able to help me with the down payment. Okay? All because we've had the capacity to accumulate some wealth over time. When I graduated, I was under no pressure to support anyone in my family. I could just go out and focus on myself. Working at UNC, the majority of my students come out and go right back to supporting their families. Very, very different experience. I've been able to live, I lived in Scottsdale, folks. I went to Saguaro High School. So, we may have been on the South Side. We may have been in a townhouse and not a house, but whatever. I had the gifted and talented program, honors programs, AP programs, early college experiences, leadership trainings, athletics, yearbook, journalism. I was like a college entrance person's wet dream, right? I mean, I'm sorry, but it's ridiculous. All those things contributed to me getting here. So yeah, I worked hard, but there's a lot of people out there who've got everything that I've got in terms of my intrinsic abilities, who couldn't get here today because they did not have some of the same identities that I have. So I have always got to acknowledge both, and I think that is my job to do so. I want to end today on a quote that comes from the article that you've got. I believe it's on page 35. So if you just listen for a moment, this is a short paragraph. We need to be clear that there is no such thing as giving up one's privilege to be, quote, outside the system. We're always in the system, folks. The only question is whether we are a part of the system in a way which challenges or strengthens the status quo. Privilege is not something I take, in which I therefore have the option of not taking. No, it's something that society gives me. And unless I change the institutions which give it to me, they will continue to give it. And I will continue to have it, no matter how noble or egalitarian my intentions may be. Okay? I have to actively work to dismantle the privilege that I have. Any passive efforts, they're not going to get us there. Whoosh! So that was a whole lot of information in a short period of time. Take a moment to shake out your brains and your hands, okay? Take a deep breath or two. Thank you. I see the clap there. I appreciate that. It's always good seeing people's faces. But I would like to go ahead and open to questions now. And I'm pretty open here. You can ask personal questions, professional, research related. You go to town, and if I need help, I got my husband here.
Perfect. As always, we didn't have many typed questions. It seems everyone was pretty wrapped in attention. I personally was very inspired and moved. I'll go ahead and ask a first question. Feel free to raise your hand and I will call on you. I experience a lot of guilt from my privilege. I understand that it's just a genetic dice roll, and I was lucky to be born into the culture, the society, the heritage, all of that. And I find myself apologizing and feeling bad for the luck the privilege that I have. This discomfort motivates me, but is there a point where you should, I guess, is there a point where you should work to enjoy those privileges still, and yet work to change the system, right?
Yeah. Guilt is a big one. I certainly carry guilt as well. And I try to talk about that with my students a lot. What I generally hear from folks is that guilt is not helpful to people with non-privileged identities. And as a woman, I know that. Okay, male guilt is not going to help me really, right? So I think that in terms of coping with our own feelings of guilt, it can be helpful to do that with other in-group members. So if I'm talking about white guilt, maybe I need to be talking about that with other white folks and not trying to put that on the shoulders of people of color. What do I do though with the privilege I've got? I have it. It's not going to go away in my lifetime, as I was just saying. So what do I do with it? Yes, there's still guilt involved, and I'm aware every day, of the privilege that I have. My feeling is I need to use my privilege, as you said, as a source of motivation to get out there and educate and ultimately dismantle the privilege. One book that I found helpful in tackling these feelings of guilt was White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. That's a more recent one. Some of you may have read White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And that's particularly good for white folks in tackling this and how we can sideline conversations with our guilt and our tears, which are not helping anybody get anywhere. So I think of it as, I'm a psychologist, and when I'm with clients, I keep my issues to myself. And if anything gets triggered for me in a session, I'm going to go home and I'm going to manage that on my own. Maybe I get my counseling, I educate myself, I do that. I do that the same in this regard too. When I'm out working with other groups, I'm going to keep my own shit to myself. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to deal with that. I'm going to keep educating myself. But when I'm in those groups and in those places, I'm there to listen. I'm there to listen and find out how my voice can be helpful. I'm not going to tell and dictate how my voice can be helpful, but I'm going to listen and ask and find out, how can I be the best ally possible? When is it helpful for your group to have me speak? When is it helpful for me to just sit down and shut up and let other people speak instead? So I do think it's important. Your experience is normal. I think, Ron, I think a lot of us feel the same thing. And any of these identities. So it's not just white guilt or male guilt. I mean, any of these identities, we feel some guilt because we know we didn't earn these per se. So it's good to acknowledge it. It is good to have groups of folks with whom you can discuss it and process it and kind of get that out. Okay. I think we just want to be mindful of who we're pressuring to process that guilt with us. It's not the job of people without the privileged identities. It's not their job to console those of us who do have them. Doesn't mean they're not legitimate issues, but choose carefully who you're going to kind of burden with that information. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Roy, you're up, sir.
Thank you. I had to unmute myself. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I can, yes.
Thank you. I don't feel guilty. I never have, but I've come to the conclusion a long time ago that, I and no one actually chose to be here. We didn't pick our parents. We didn't pick where we were born or gender or anything like that. And I've come to the conclusion that what's important is not those obvious things of color, origin, gender, this sort of thing. It's what's up here, what's between the ears. That's where the important things are, where we do our thinking. We all have a sense of self-awareness. In fact, probably all living things have some sense of self-awareness, otherwise they wouldn't do what they do. But my question would be, how would be best to make some changes in how we educate people, is to help kind of make this not such a issue with people as to how they look and this kind of thing. Where they work from? Do they have an accent? Who cares? Are they able to function as a good part of society and a good human being.
Thank you, Ron. I appreciate that question. And that's a big one. And a lot of times my
It's Roy,
students
not Ron.
Oh, I'm sorry, Roy. My bad. My bifocals are not doing so well. I do have some students.
Don't hold it against me.
Not at all. Some students who worry, aren't we just being overly divisive if we continue to focus on these different identities? So a couple of things here. When I'm teaching health psychology and psychology, I like to point out to students, when we're looking at our own lives and our health and our outcomes, we like to think that it has to do with our personal selves, right? I'm where I am today, and I'm this because of my personality and my self-discipline and all these very personal intrinsic qualities. But it turns out that the variables that are the best predictor of physical, mental health, and a wide variety of other things are not those personal things. They're not our minds. They're not our individual opinions, strengths, and weaknesses. They are, in fact, the very identities that I just reviewed. Your race is a bigger determinant of your long-term health and access to anything than your personality, your history, your hard work, anything like that. That's what the data shows. So as long as those discrepancies continue to exist, no, we cannot ignore them. In fact, jumping to ignore them, I think, is part of the problem, because as a society, we have not even come close to adequately acknowledging what severe disparities these identities can lead to. Ideally, Roy, where do I want my kids to live someday in the world that I want them to live in? I really like the world you're describing. I would like that world where we truly were evaluated just based on our contributions, our abilities, our thoughts, our creativity, our love, compassion for other human beings. I really hope we can get there someday. We are nowhere near there right now, and we are not ever going to get there until we start by educating and acknowledging all of these disparities that do exist. Now, what I'd love to see is the discussion that I'm having with you all today be taught in schools early on. Early. Let me come into your elementary schools. I can be developmentally appropriate. Don't worry about this. I got good kid skills, okay? I will teach this to kids. My own 4-year-old, we took him to a Martin Luther King march one day, and he came home. He's like, Mom, what is all this race stuff anyway? And my brain exploded briefly as I thought, holy shit, how do I? Okay, grab the globe. All right, dear. European colonialism, 500 years ago. Here we go. And it was, a 2-minute talk, but he's 13 now. And trust me, his understanding has developed a lot over these years too. So we keep coming back to these issues. I really want to push against the idea, though, that we need to avoid talking about these issues because of the divisiveness it could cause. This is not what you said, Roy, at all, but this is what we're seeing in a lot of states around the country right now. We're not going to talk about, quote, critical race theory in our schools. We're going to make it illegal to talk about it, which to me is, so you're making it illegal to talk about history. That's what you're saying. So are we like the Chinese saying we can't talk about Tiananmen Square? How are we possibly any different? All right. So I want to see these issues integrated into our curriculum. We have got to acknowledge them. And only after we come to a bit of a reckoning with it, with acknowledgement and validation, can we move to that place that I think, Roy, you and I might like to be eventually. Okay.
Thank you. But I agree that, yeah, this is what I would like to, I think talking about these things is excellent. We need to do that, but do it in such a way that we get the understanding that it's just a matter of a throw of the dice as to which one of these categories are some or that we have. And you can't blame anyone for having any of these characteristics.
Right. I can't blame you for being born the way you are. I can blame you for actions you're taking to perpetuate your own privilege and not challenging the system, right? But absolutely. So I think you're talking to the guilt. You're speaking to that guilt again. And, why on earth would we feel guilty? Just we had no control over it. And I agree with you on that regard. Where we might feel guilt is when we start to acknowledge and recognize that, I've engaged in some behaviors that have really exploited this privilege, and I need to change that. That's where we may see some of the guilt. So thank you, Roy.
Thank you. With that, I would like to go ahead and wrap it up. Is there anything you'd like to say, mention? Where can we find you online? Any books that you'd like to promote? Anything like that, Lisa?
I need to write a book, huh? I need to. I'll be back in 5 years with my book, okay? No, I am going to send you the book list because when I teach, I walk into my classroom with a suitcase, almost every topic, with all the books that I want to share with my students. And since I taught remotely this year, I made a list finally. And of course, I have to add to it every 2 to 3 weeks. But I will send that out because the more the merrier, man. Let's share these ideas. I would love to get book recommendations from any of you, documentaries, you name it. Consider me an avid, excited learner and excited to get information from you. You are welcome to email me. Let me put it in the chat right here real quick, okay? At lisakwoody@gmail.com. That's my professional Gmail. Sorry, my professional email. Goodness, I don't want more than one. You can email me about anything. If you want to email me personal experiences, if you want to talk about this talk, if you want to talk about resources, I'm game. I love these conversations. Mentoring and hanging out and talking about this stuff is one of my favorite things to do. So I'd say feel invited to consider me a resource that's out there, but it's reciprocal because I'm learning from you at the same time. But I'm a resource, whether it's this month, it's a year, 5 years from now, just know I'm out there still kicking it. And if anybody feels like they want to consult with me on any of these kinds of topics, absolutely here with you anytime. Love it.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you very much. Some last words. If you enjoyed our content, please smash the subscribe button, contribute to our Patreon account, become a member of HSGP or volunteer. With that, be well, stay safe, and take care. Goodbye, HSGP.